Okay. So thank you, Anne-Caroline, and thank you, Jakob, for inviting me today. It's really a pleasure for me to be here. And I have to ask everyone, so because I'm sick, so I'll take a few sips of tea, and if you don't mind, sorry, but so my presentation will maybe go a bit slower because of that. So I'll start by sharing my screen. Yes. Okay. So can everyone see the screen, I think? So, okay, Jakob and Caroline, can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. So today I will discuss a topic that is indeed connected to the article. So my article in the book Jakob mentioned earlier, so this book in honor of my mentor, Amalia Catagnotti, who first sparked my interest in the Ebla text. But my exploration of this subject began actually 3 years ago, while I was working on my PhD dissertation. In my research for the PhD, I encountered the term tigina into Ebla text, noted for their distinctive numerical notation. As I was studying, indeed, mathematics and numerical notation, everything that was linked to numbers, let's say, in the Ebla text and in text from the third millennium. So this led me to uncover connections between these particular objects, so these tiginas, and several men involved in their supply, and again, the city of Armi, which appeared to be the source of these objects. So initially, I focused on analyzing the numerical notation, the chronology, and the content of this text. But however, I delayed the publication of the article, let's say, until Alfonso Archi released the volume RED14, which is indeed a crucial volume for this study, and particularly given its rich information on the chronology of the Ebla text. So the insight on numerical notation were, in the end, incorporated into my dissertation, and only later I began revisiting the tigina topic more deeply, and I used the occasion of Amalia's birthday to pursue the traces of these objects. And additionally, what inspired, let's say, my presentation today was Piotr Steinkeller's presentation at the KIM conference in Kültepe this year, where he discussed the role of Armi and Kabul in the Ebla gold trade and provided so valuable insight that further enriched my research. But before we dive deeper in this topic, I'll briefly review some fundamental information. So this slide shows the location of ancient Ebla, which corresponds to the modern-day Tel Mardik in Syria, which is located about 60 kilometers south of Aleppo. And here in the slide, you can see instead a close-up on the Tel, and on the left and on the right, the Royal Palace G, as it appeared before the onset of the Syrian conflict in 2010. So the texts we'll discuss today were found inside this Royal Palace G, and specifically in the main archive room, L2769, which is often referred to in literature as the Great Archive, which is a literal translation of calcus, let's say, of the Italian term Il Grande Archivio. So this archive was in fact discovered 50 years ago by the Italian archaeological team from the University of Rome La Sapienza, which was led at the time, by Paolo Mattia. And most of the tablets found in this room were administrative in nature. And so they still provide valuable insight into the economic, political, and social dynamics related to Ebla and surrounding region. And among these administrative documents are the so-called Mudu texts, which have been republished in a comprehensive volume by Alfonso Archi, which is RED14, and the same volume I mentioned earlier. This volume also includes the two texts, as I said, that initially caught up my attention 3 years ago. So the Mudu texts record the palace's income, Mudu, primarily in precious metals like gold, silver, as well as textile, which were contributed by various individuals. So these contributors include prominent members of the Ebla administration, such as the Lugal, which is a term usually translated as lords, and the so-called ministers like Arulum, Ibrium, and its son Ibidzikir, who served under the reigns of Irkabdamu and Ishardamu, who are the last two kings of Ebla. Additionally, allied cities, especially in the latter part of Ishardamu's reign, played a key role in these transactions. And from this record, we can indeed identify several cities that supplied gold to Ebla, which is the topic we'll explore further today. So talking about gold, this slide shows real-life examples related to today's topic. So golden decoration discovered in Ebla Palestina. The significance of gold in the Ebla economy is well documented, with numerous articles addressing the subject, and references to gold are widespread throughout the Ebla tablets. For example, to my knowledge, the term for gold appears more than 5,700 times in this text, which is, let's say, a substantial volume of information. And this abundance corresponds to the numerous forms of gold and gold objects mentioned in the text, which include containers of different forms, plaques, ornaments of various types, objects, different other objects which have not been yet identified, ingots, or even small unworked pieces in which gold would circulate. So the meticulous attention these items and gold in general received is underscored by how the Ebla scribes carefully recorded the silver equivalents of gold objects. And this happened particularly in documents regarding monthly distribution of items and textiles to the palace personnel and guests. But as mentioned earlier, this talk focuses on a specific item, which is the tigina. So in the Ebla text, the spelling tigina has two variants, which are tikina and tikinum, and corresponds to the Akkadian noun tiknum, which refer to a type of ornament, so an ornament, which in the case of the Ebla text has been recognized to indicate a torque. And for that, I would also like to thank again Piotr Steinkeller for suggesting the term ornament at the Kim conference, which refines my initial translation of the term as dual. And so these ornaments were primarily made of gold, though sometimes of silver, and often featured a plique, typically in the form of animals. And you can see in the image on the slide, which features the famous dying goal example, which one of the most renowned Turks in art history. And you can see how elaborate this decoration, these objects could be. Let's say it's not the same setting as the Ebla one, but still it gives the idea. And Ebla examples were quite heavy, averaging around 350 grams. And like the dying gold Turk, they often feature two-end shaped, in the case of the Ebla, objects as animal heads. We have this, they're defined literally as sangs or as heads. And this slide also shows a gold torque from the second millennium BC, northern France, which again could give us an idea of how a golden torque would have been shaped, possibly also in Ebla. So 20 years ago, Alfonso Archi extensively examined the distribution of tiginas and other ornaments or jewels to the members of the Ebla elite. They are usually women, though sometimes men, and also even deities in occasion of offerings given, let's say, to these deities. However, uncertainties remained at the point regarding how the Ebla Palace acquired these ornaments. So the investigation I deepened the topic by exploring the recently republished Moodle texts, as I said, which detail the supply and arrival of these ornaments of De Tigina at Ebla. So this study has been complemented by reference to other administrative texts, but by the analysis of the Moodle text, I could reveal that at least 27 individuals, which are mostly Ebla men and one woman, notably the wife of a man called Nadzumu, supplied tiginas to the Ebla king, Ishodamo. An analysis of this text provides valuable insight into the time frame in which this individual operated, and according to Arki's reconstruction, these documents can be dated to what we say years Ibizihir 4 to 13, with one extending to Ibizihir 16. For those of you who don't know, the Ebla texts are not dated to the year, the years are not dating according to the king, but according to the so-called minister. So Ibizihir was the minister in the second part of Ishardamu's reign, and so the years are dated accordingly. So as shown in this slide, most tiginas, let's say more than 10, arrived at the Ebla Palace in years Ibizihir 8, Ibizihir 11, and Ibizihir 6, which alone marks a peak in the numbers of suppliers and of tigina arriving at the palace. So we have more than 30 objects arriving at the palace. And throughout this period, let's say the Moodle documents consistently detail ornaments acquired by the Ebla king through intermediaries with function. So these 27 men I was presenting earlier act as intermediaries of the Ebla palace, but their function is not always specified in the text. So some of them were traveling agents, mashkims, and some of them were watchmen, mazzalum, but others lack such institutional titles. So these suppliers received the tigina ornaments as nikba allotment while outside of Ebla, and then they would bring them to the palace. Additionally, we know a caravan or maybe a group of couriers, Kasfor, associated with Lugal Ishkibarzu, who also supplied 2 silver tigina. So we have one, not a function, but more information on the type of people. So the role that these people who were acting as suppliers held. So the consistency across this record suggests that all the individuals likely served as traveling suppliers, possibly along additional responsibilities. For example, we know 2 very active men, so Nadzumu and Ishmadamu, these suppliers, were also active in other capacities. So by examining instances of tigina supply, we see that these 2 men I was mentioning earlier, so Ishmadamu and Nadzumu, were prominent supplier, and they are recorded 19 and 14 times. So 19 times Ishmadamu and 14 times Nadzumu. Following are Atesh and Raum with 7 and 6 mentions. And as shown in this slide, the activities of these 4 individuals tend to intersect. And they do intersect in year Ibizikr 6, 7, 10, and 11, with at least 3 of them active simultaneously, with year Ibizikr 6 being the year of the peak in the income of the tigina ornaments, and the only year where the 4 of them are active at the same time. So of these men, however, only Atesh is explicitly designated as a watchman, so Mazzalum, while the same does not apply to Nadzumu, Ishmadamu, and Ruaum, which, as I said, are unlabeled. So we don't know what function they hold. However, all these individuals are reported in more than one text to have traveled to Armi, together or alone over the years. And as you can see, this slide presents some of the passages documented in these trips to Armi, which were undertaken by the above-mentioned individuals. So in the first 3 passages, so 2, 3, and 4, we say, let's say our couple, so Nazumo and Ishmadamo, who would travel together quite often. Then in passage 5, we have Ruaum traveling with them. And in passage 6, again, Ruaum, but with another man, so Inti. And in passage 7, Atesh traveling with a foreigner, Zushabir, so with whom we'll deal in a few moments. So as anticipated, these Ebla men were not the only ones acting as couriers, acting as suppliers of the Ebla golds. And Ebla gold. So in addition to these Ebramans, we know 3 foreigners who participated in the supply of Tigina ornaments. The first of them is Shamilu, a man originally from Armi, which is recorded inside Mudu clauses, so concerning not only Tigina, but other precious objects. So he would travel back and forth carrying these Tiginas and other precious objects. The second one is Shabir, so the man who was traveling with Atesh a few slides ago, and he also is very active. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 passages mentioning his journeys and his activities regarding Tiginas and again other objects. So as a supplier. And finally, we have one last individual, Guddi, who, like Zushabir, acted on behalf of the Ebla Palace and collaborated with a man named Ruaum, while, so this Ruaum, which we were mentioning earlier, while Zushabir is active together with Atesh and Ishmadamo. So all of these suppliers, foreigners and locals, as for all these suppliers, while only some texts explicitly state the origins of the Tiginas, we know that details can be gleaned from several records which document each of these individuals would travel to places in order to obtain some ornaments. So in the present slide, the explicit records of these journeys are listed in chronological order as I was able to collect them. And not every journey, let's say, not every passage, not every text gives the same information about journeys, about who was involved. So again, the functions, the destination of the journey, the month in which the journey was undertook. But at least it gives an idea of the activities of these men, which would go back and forth through the years from Ebla to Armi and so back. Based on the available documentation, there are only 3 places where the Tiginas were bestowed in form of an allotment, so nikbam. And these are Gamumu, Ardagulum, and of course, Armi. So the first 2 toponyms correspond to 2 poorly attested cities, especially Gamumu, and the third is instead a well-attested toponym and represent the main source of the Ebla gold during the second half of Ishadamo's reign. But let's say all this evidence suggests that the expedition supplying Tiginas were primarily commercial in nature. So first of all, we have 3 itinerant professions. So the mashkims, who acted as traveling agents, the mazalum were the watchmen, and the presence of kaskas, which could be translated as caravan, so making the mazalums watchmen of the caravan, as well as a plural, or there was the word kasfor, so couriers, let's say, so couriers. Second, the palace paid travel fees nikaskal to key figures such as Atesh, Ishmadamu, Natsumu, and Raum, so Atesh being a watchman himself, who, as we have seen, acted as Ebla intermediaries in supplying King Ishodamus with these precious ornaments. Third, we have explicit mention of journeys, Kaskal, and at least one expedition, Nixkask, which I believe to be commercial in nature, in which a tigina was allocated. At the conclusion of this cycle, we encounter two key terms, which are Nikba and Mudu, which represent two ends of the same process, actually. So specifically from the perspective of the palace, they reflect two phases of a single transaction. So in this process, the tigina ornament is first allocated far away from Ebla, so in Armi, in Gamumu, in Ardagulum, and to one of the Ebla men acting as suppliers. Then these same suppliers bring the object back to Ebla, where the object is recorded as palace income under the name of Mudu. So this signifies that the object has now come under the supervision of the palace administration, but it's the same objects, firstly labeled as Nikba and then as Mudu. At this point, so upon arrival at the palace, as attested in at least two passages, the tigina ornaments are stored inside the Ichu Siki, literally the house of the womb, which usually has been identified as the storeroom where the Ebla treasury was kept, becoming part of the asset of the Ebla king, which are defined as Nikitsa. So inside the Mudu text, the sums are given and the objects which are now inside, let's say the Ichu Siki, they are labeled as Nikita, so as assets of the king. As for the occasion on which the goods forming the royal assets, so these Nikitsa, were received and accounted for, one can note that this term, Nikitsa, consistently appears in the summary of the Mudu text, dated to the second half of Ishodamu's reign. So again, the text dated to Ibidzikir's years. These summaries are labeled as in Irmi or in Mawatim, and possibly Irmi and Mawatim indicated two yearly calendrical events, respectively falling in the 9th and, among others, the 12th month, because indeed the date of the Mawatim was not fixed, but may fall between the 9th and the 12th month. And in this respect, Alfonso Archi distinguished between regular incomes, which were accounted up to the 9th month, so in Irmi, and additional incomes that were accounted until the 12th month, so Mawatim. Going back to our tiginas, one may notice how they are supplied only in a short time span. So again, which fall in this second half of Ishodamu's reign. And those, we see again, those years which are named after Ibidzikir and the peak in the 6th year. The difference with the slide I showed before here, the tigina, so the gold is accounted in kilos and not as in the number of objects. So we have 17 kilos, let's say, of gold arriving at Ebla in the year Ibidzikir 6. But now moving away from the tiginas and Armi, we see our Armi wasn't the sole source of gold for Ebla. As you can see in the slide, several other locations also provided gold during Ishodamu's reign. As Piotr Steinkeller already pointed out on the role played by Kablul, I also found attestation concerned, here displayed in order of frequency, concerning Dub, the Gurazu, Rag, Kakmion, and Harran. But as for today, I'll show you some data concerning only the first 3 toponyms in line, which are Kablul Dub and the Gurazu, as they are, let's say, the most frequent, even though Durazzo doesn't have that many, let's say, imports. So we start with Kablu, and this graph focuses on gold imports measured in kilos again from Kablu with yearly data points. And they concern upon so the incomes and the imports achieved during the reign of Ishadamu. And a key observation is a sharp peak in gold imports in the year Ibrium 3, where the volume exceeds 20 kilos. And again, in Ibrium 16, where it exceeds 5 kilos. As a note, Ebla minas weighed 470 grams. So when I talk about 20 kilos, let's say we have 10 minas of 40 minas, more or less, of gold. Then we see how from the year EBCQ1 onwards, the gold imports stabilize, and they tend to average around 2.5 kilos per year. So again, around 5 minas, considering this mina corresponding to 470 grams, indicating a more consistent and steady flow of gold after this initial spike. So the Kabul gold is usually supplied in an unprocessed form. This has already been pointed out by Stankeler in his talk during the KIM. So we have this term hash, which indicates unprocessed bits of gold which would circulate. Afterwards, this graph tracks the yearly imports of gold from Du'ub, again during Ishadamu's reign. And the data from Du'ub reflects more fluctuation than Kablul. So we see Kablul as some huge fluctuation at the beginning, so with years where no gold from Kablul is attested during the Ibrium period, but starting from the second half of the Ibrium period, we go to a standardization, to an averaging of the gold income, so of the gold imports coming, so the gold coming from Kablul. Du'ub has a different situation, and here the graph can be, let's say, misleading because they are not compared. Here the maximum value is 20 kilos, here is 0.9. So we have much more fluctuation, but the quantities of gold coming from Du'ub are much more, let's say, they're much less than those from Kabul, but still there is much more fluctuation. But with, let's say, we see some years overlapping, so with the lack of gold. So the data, we see how certain years show peaks, spikes, and others shows not imports at all. So notable spikes occur in years Ibrium 1, 7, 13, and let's say again 18, and then Ibizihir 2. So reaching close to 1 kilo. However, the quantity of gold, as I said, imported from Du'ub is much lower than that from Armi and Kabul. And this gold is also mostly imported in an unprocessed form, but we have on the side some containers also shaped and made of gold. This first slide focuses on the imports from the Durazzo, which are, let's say, sporadic, the least, and these are infrequent, but we observe a significant peak in the year EBZQ 11, with the amount of gold reaching more than 1.2, so 1.3 kilos of imported gold. And so Dugurazzo was not supplying gold on a regular basis. But these pairs with the textual references and the documents we register out, these imports were mainly in the form of objects and rarely in the form of unprocessed gold. So this slide shows a comparative data set showing the material coming from Kablul, Dub, Armi, and Dugurazzo during Ishadamu's reign. So the colors are maintained. So Kablul is in orange, Dub is in blue, Armi in green, and Dugurazzo in brown. And so starting with Kablul, we see how Kablul contributed significantly early on, especially in the first year, so Ibrahim 1, which also corresponds to the first year of Ishadamu's reign, but its export declined sharply afterward with a general blank point, with the exception of these few imports in Ibrahim 3, Ibrahim 7, and Ibrahim 8, with Ibrahim 3 showing the imports from Kablul and Ibrahim 7 and 8 imports from Dub. So the imports start again from Ibrahim 9 onward, and Kablul is the one who shows the major consistency, let's say, in the amount of gold imported, and also in the length of the import. So going from Ibrahim 9 to EBZQ 13 without stops, let's say. Okay, Ibrahim 12 has less gold, but still there is a straight continuity. As for Dub and Armi, we see how the quantities again of gold delivered, so from Dub, so the imported gold come from Dub, are much more less, but still they show some consistency. At what we can observe is that there's a switch. So the gold from Dub starts from Ibrahim 7 to EBZQ 3, and then we have a switch situation where the imports from Armi start. And Armi has these huge peaks, and also these imports, so these tiginas, these jewels, which arrive in great quantities at the palace. And alone, even though it's not consistent as Kablul, the quantities of gold imported from Armi tend to exceed those from Kablul. And then on top, we have these sporadically imports from Dugurazzo, which are also not very close. Yes, we have a close group here, but then alone, this little peak in Ibrahim 16. So in summary, they were highly variable, with Kablul leading early and being the most consistent of the four, but Armi becoming the dominant supplier later in Ishadamu's reign for all this phase, and also is the only one the only region, the only city delivering gold in this last year after a blank spot, let's say. So this slide addresses finally the locations of these primary gold suppliers to Ebla. And everyone knows the exact location of the toponyms in the Ebla text remained a topic of debate. However, it has different solutions have been proposed, and as it has been proposed primarily by Marco Bonecchi and Piotr Steinkeller, Armi may be located in Silesia, And according to Steinkeller, also, this could also apply to Kaplul. As for Dugrazu, Maria Giovanna Biga and Piotr Steinkeller again highlighted its possible association with Egypt. As for Dub, Paul Mathieu, followed by other Ebla scholars, has long proposed the association between Dub, Tuba, and Sotalum el Marra. So as for Armi and Kablul, if these proposed locations are correct, which I believe, could have imported the gold directly from the Taurus Mountains. So in detail, the passages showcased in this slide, among those presented during this talk, record information about Armi and about a mountain of gold, which is likely located in the Taurus range. And in general, the significant role played by the Kingdom of Armi, which have made control the shipment of gold from this mountain of gold from the Taurus to the Ebla and the old northern Levant. So we have, again, some specific lexicon shows, so Shubalaka, so to barter gold, and everything points out to the role that Armi played together with the evidence gathered from the Tigina, so situation that Armi would have been in this prominent position, so delivering the Taurus gold to at least, let's say, the Ebla region and the Northern Levant region. So returning to our map, so our locations, and we see how Dugrazu, which was maybe so located on the Egypt's border, or possibly was referring to Egypt itself. And so Dugrazu would have sourced its gold, according to the common interpretation for the ancient Egypt in general, by the Eastern Desert and Nubia. And this was long ago, let's say 20 years ago, noted by Dietrich and Rosemary Clem and Rasmus in an article dated to the early 2000s. So we know that Egyptian gold would come from Nubia and the Eastern Desert. And given the distance between the Dugrazu and Ebla, one can also better comprehend why, yes, the amounts of gold imported from Dugrazu was significantly less from the one of Armi and Kablul, for example, which were much more closer, and also would have maybe a different influence on this whole area. And let's say Dub, not being near any gold source, is more comparable to Ebla as another potential target for the Anatolian gold. Possibly it was even acting as an intermediary, so between the Anatolian region, so this Anatolian kingdom cities, Armi and Ebla. And in fact, as one can see, it's still, I need to delve much more deeper in this topic, but as one can see, the supply of the Dub gold and the Armi gold switch. So it is possible that these would indicate some modifications in the circuit of supply of gold, and it would have been maybe caused by different political events that would require, and indeed I will do it a deeper study. So, but I think this data, and so the possible location, let's say, of Dub, are worth of being taken into consideration for a further study that would look at the supply strategies, gold supply strategies adopted by Ebla. And so I would like to conclude, let's say, with a peculiar insight, which connects to this dupe topic, so this dupe thing. And it was, as Piotr Steinkeller pointed out, also at the Kim meeting, so Kültepe International meeting in August, Telum and Marra, which, so the possible location for dupe, if we accept this identification, yielded a torque, thus a tigina, let's say, albeit made of bronze, whereas Ebla has yielded none. So I think it's really worth looking into this, let's say, dupe situation and try to give to provide some explanation for this switching and for the different, let's say, supply strategies in the Ebla import of gold. And with that, I thank you all for your attention, and I look forward to questions and remarks, because I'm deep in this topic right now, but I'm trying to figure out many things, and it would be my pleasure to hear from you about your ideas and your opinions, or to see where I can further explore the topic.
Thank you very much.